Ireland. It was a completely terrible, pointless and horrible tournament for Ireland the last time they came to the World Cup. And weirdly enough, it started with them beating the Netherlands in an early game, partly because Curtis Kamfer kind of destroyed that game. But then they got beat by Sri Lanka, where the spinners completely took over. All they had to do was win a match against Namibia, which they obviously did not win.
This is the last knot. My dad told me to say this.
But when you actually break down the entire tournament, they just didn't look like they could make any runs other than Paul Stirling. In fact, some of them didn't even look like they could hit the ball off the square. And the Namibia game was the perfect example of that, where they set 126 and Namibia got it 2 wickets down. If they're that bad again, I think a lot of questions are going to be asked of Irish cricket. Ireland have plenty of new ball talent. Mark Adair has shown for a while that he should probably be getting more opportunities in the higher franchise leagues. He could swing the ball both ways. He's a genuine wicket taker. Backing him up is Barry McCarthy, and it was Craig Young, although Craig Young's just gone home and he's being replaced by someone else. So that does weaken that sort of more reliable backup core. But because they do have Curtis Kamfer, they kind of can get away with even Craig Young being injured. Kamfer is a little bit like Shardul Thakur. Sometimes you look at him and go, he probably shouldn't be that good. Sometimes you look at him and go, he doesn't actually look that good. And then he's got 2 or 3 wickets and the game has changed. He's quite a handy bowler to have as your 5th option in Australia. So if you look at what you have at the moment, they have 1 major frontliner, 1 decent second chance, and an all-rounder who's played above his station probably so far. And we haven't yet mentioned Josh Little. I'm still unsure of how good he can be, but as a fast left-arm bowler who can bowl over or around the wicket, he's got a lot that he can offer. This is probably still a tournament too early for him, but I think there's a lot of better teams at Ireland that we're looking up Josh Little and being like, that's a pretty handy bowler that we would like to develop going into the future. When it comes to weaknesses, I just don't know how they can consistently punish teams without Sterling going nuts or Harry Tector having a huge tournament. Balbirnie is incredible when he's in form, and when he's not, he's almost a dead weight. Lorcan Tucker is a really handy player, but I'm not sure he can blast world-class attacks consistently. And their 5th best batter is George Dockrell, who you may remember used to be a bowler. None of them average over 30 in the last 2 years, and only Dockrell has a strike rate of 130 or higher. And after that, it's players like Delaney and Simi Singh, Kamfer and Adair. None are terrible with the bat, but they're more like cameo players. It does feel that there is something missing from within the Ireland batting structure at the moment. Of course, if Paul Stirling does go nuts, then it looks a lot better. The absolute worst case for Ireland is if they lose to Scotland. I wonder if for some Irish fans, if they even think of it this way, of as long as we beat Scotland, everything else that happens just happens. But the worst case scenario is obviously losing to Scotland and not qualifying for the next round. The best case is that they have a decent side, and I think Scotland is still a better team. However, I don't think there is that much between those two particular sides. Ireland should certainly favour themselves against Zimbabwe, and they have beaten West Indies in a World Cup in Australia before, and that was before the whole Shimron Hetmeyer plane thing. I think if Ireland do manage to get through to the next round, they're still going to struggle in the next group, perhaps more than Zimbabwe or even Scotland might. I've watched them a lot of recent times, and I just don't think there is enough here for them to win consistently against the top teams when it gets a bit more serious. But considering what happened in the last World Cup and how they've been playing in T20 cricket over the last couple of years, I think getting through to the next round would be a best case scenario anyway. And once they're there, sometimes they do just find a way to upset teams. The Scottish team had to struggle through qualifying, partly because maybe they had me as their analyst, but they have done a lot better since I haven't worked for them. That could be a coincidence. I'll have to check the numbers. But last World Cup, they jumped out of the gates, beating Bangladesh and then defeated Oman and Papua New Guinea. I think all things considered, when you look at that on paper, that was certainly the easier group. But they were still the only ones to roll in the way that they did. The Afghanistan game was a bit of a throwaway for them when they got to the next round, but scoring only 109 against Namibia really hurt them. They kept New Zealand honest, but were easily beaten by India and Pakistan. It doesn't sound that inspiring when you say all these things out loud, but this was the greatest tournament that Scottish cricket has ever had. I think the greatest strength has to be hitting the ball. It doesn't always come through in their stats, but the power they have for an associate is really amazing. Their new captain is Richie Berrington, and he clears the offside with incredible regularity and can do it against pretty much all the bowlers in the world. George Munsey can still attack the spinners, but teams play him a lot better now that everyone knows about him. Having said that, in the power play, he should still be able to make a mess out of other teams. And perhaps most importantly is Michael Leach, who has been a long-term project player for Scotland. He's finally started to hit the ball as consistently as he once did powerfully. Putting those two things together makes him tricky for other teams. I think over the last few years, the Scottish bowling's actually been slightly underrated. Davey has taken wickets almost every time he has worn a Scottish shirt. Sharif is turning into a really reliable grizzled veteran at this point. Mark Watts is one of the most interesting bowlers in T20 cricket. And Hamza Tahir is a really good left-arm orthodox as well. Although they struggled to get him and Watt in, because they're both the same. Brad Wheel struggled in the last World Cup, but we saw in the first 100 what a terrific talent he is as well. There's a lot of good bowlers in that side. Of their weaknesses, it's clear that in the last 2 years they haven't made the runs that they did before. That was kind of how they rose as this spoiling T20 team. The power is still there, but before they also had amazing, reliable top four that you could essentially set your clock with. Now with Kutzer gone and McLeod and Munsey struggling for T20 form, Berrington is the only one of that big four that is still firing. Cross and McLeod are scoring at a strike rate below 100 over the last couple of years, and one of them really has to push the nitro button at this tournament. Yes, they've got a lot of bowling talent, but it's still not enough to carry them through the tournament. I also want to point out Brandon McMullen here. Not because I know much about him, but mostly because it sounds like he's a computer game character you would use if your program didn't have the rights to use Brendan McCullum. The absolute worst case for Scotland is if they lose to Ireland. Sorry, I just really wanted to do that joke. I think the absolute worst case scenario for them here is that they only win a single game and they don't go through. Even if they won 2 games, I think they could say they're on the cusp of going through. But if they win a single game and they don't go through to the second round, they might be looking at a bit of a rebuild, especially if their batting order going ahead. As for best case scenario, obviously it's getting through to the second round again. I think because of the power and the bowling that they have. Not to mention that this is a team that also probably thinks about T20 cricket slightly better than Ireland or Zimbabwe do. If they do get through to the next round, they might be able to give some upsets. I think they'd be disappointed last time that they got through and didn't do much. This time, the best case scenario would be at least winning the games against the other associate or teams of their levels, and then trying to pull off one big win above them. It's going to be tough for them to go 3-0 in this group like they did last time, but West Indies, Ireland and Zimbabwe, Scotland could do that, and that gives them a good amount of momentum going into that next part of the tournament, and then I suppose we see how they go.